From the Post Building in downtown North St. Louis, this is Inside City. For our 20th episode of Inside City, I sat down with Cara Spencer, Alderwoman for the 8th Ward and a candidate for mayor for the city of St. Louis. Cara entered the political arena in 2015, motivated by the ability to have a direct impact on local issues. With a background in mathematics and experience in the private sector, she brings a data-driven, results-oriented approach to her leadership. As Alderwoman, she is focused on improving city services, enhancing public safety, and driving economic development. With the election just 2 weeks away, we discussed Cara's vision for St. Louis and what she hopes to accomplish as mayor. Hi, Cara. Thanks for joining me this morning. I mentioned to you this is our 20th podcast, which is sort of a threshold of sorts. But the first time I met you, I don't know if you recall, but we were both on bicycles riding on to North St. Louis with Jim and your son. And we were riding bikes to look at the North Riverfront. And that was a few years ago. So maybe I'll just jump into that. I mean, you've had some ideas about the North Riverfront and things that we could do with it, that it's been underutilized. So we'll start there.
Yeah, that's right. Funny enough, I was on that bike trail this morning, doing my morning cycle. I ride it many days a week.
Even if it's 18 degrees out, huh?
Even when it's 18 degrees out. Yeah. Electric socks do wonders. But
yeah.
No, I think the riverfront in general throughout our city, in particular the North Riverfront, is absolutely beautiful. The views across to the Illinois side, you of course, see all the barges and all the river traffic, which is quite exciting. But we're certainly underutilizing our riverfront. And that day we were taking a ride up there just to show Jim what I thought would be some neat spots for investment. And I still do.
And the Port Authority has control up and down because we can talk about things to do down there, but ultimately it's going to come down to funding and dollars. And ultimately it's, anyone can have a good idea or a bad idea or whatever, but there has to be dollars behind it. But would there be money available through the Port Authority to do something like that to improve what we've got?
There could be. So the city owns a good chunk of the land from the arch up to the chain of walks. Not all of it. Some of it is privately owned. But the Port Authority does have the authority to lease that city property. And many of those parcels are under long-term leases that were authorized and really initiated by the Port Authority. So those leasing agreements are largely directed from the Port Authority, and many of the incentive packages are really kind of a combination between SLDC and the Port Authority. And there is some funding there. There are certainly some tax incentives and some other structures that could be better utilized, in my opinion, to incentivize the type of investment, the type of development we want to see. Right now, there's not really a comprehensive plan to identify what kinds of investment we want, and we're particularly incentivizing. So you have some, as I mentioned, long-term leases that are just sort of ad hoc, really, if you ask me, and they're not really moving the North Riverfront in a particular direction.
Cara, you come just admittedly, I think, from modest means. First one in your family to go to college, and you, not many people may be aware that you are a math major at Truman State.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. I'm the first in my family to go to college. I actually got a Pell Grant to do so. And I'm really proud of that, coming out of school with a degree in mathematics. It was certainly fun to study that subject, but it was even more fun to get a job to work in that field following graduation.
And what was that job?
So I did mathematical modeling for large companies. And what I did was really built complicated systems to depict and predict market behavior for products in the development space. So I was really trying to identify where big companies should make their investments to get the biggest returns for their shareholders. It was a lot of fun.
Is there any of that you can use these days, or was it, that could even inform what you do on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even though the primary intent of the work I was doing was to calculate outcomes, there was so much consensus building, even within companies, to get to those numbers. As you or any business owner well knows, there are conflicting viewpoints, even within an organization or even within a department within an organization. So when you're evaluating a product, you have to take into account all sorts of future variables and what those might look like, and different viewpoints on what that might look like. And so the consensus building is an important piece that I've carried through to my public service. But just the logistics, understanding that any large system, even as large as a city with what is well over $1 billion budget, has limited resources. And in order to have a return to our customer base, our citizens, our residents, our business owners, our visitors, we have to deploy the resources that we do have in an effective and efficient manner. And to make those systems most efficient, you have to really strategize and evaluate the investments that you're making. So absolutely, I think of my work in the city very, very similarly to the work I was doing in the private sector.
That's really interesting. So, your first aldermanic race, I believe, was against Craig Schmidt in 2015.
That's exactly right.
Okay. And he'd been an incumbent for a
20
number of years,
years.
20
Yep,
years,
20 years.
decades.
Mhm.
And so, as far as going from mathematics and other jobs you may have had and really becoming a public servant for the city, or jumping into that, did you feel he was vulnerable? To talk about kind of that first race and what you were up against entering into that, and why you thought you could.
Well, I thought I could
Yeah,
win.
why'd you
Well,
get pulled in? Yeah.
John, believe it or not, there wasn't an enormous amount of strategy involved in running for office the first time. I was in the private sector back then, and just saw some issues in my neighborhood that I wanted to solve, and recognized that the aldermanic role was the sort of doorway to that. And I kind of joke, we were kind of trying to figure out how to eliminate the liquor moratorium so bars and restaurants could open along Cherokee Street, and nobody wanted the job, nobody wanted to run. And so I sort of joke that I pulled the short straw, if you will. But at the end of the day, there were so many issues that I wanted to see addressed in the community, in the broader space, opening up the free public pool. I mentioned the liquor moratorium, and I think in large part there was just there was a bit of naivete on my part,
Hmm.
just thinking that I can do a better job here, and a fresh perspective. Just what did I have to lose? I spent a few months knocking on doors. I was already very active in the
And
neighborhood, in the
and which ward
community.
was this? I know the wards have changed, but formerly, was it Eighth Ward or no?
I'm
Mm,
the 8th ward
yeah.
now. So back then I was in the 20th ward, and the
Okay.
boundaries are actually really quite different. So my previous ward, Gravely Park, Dutchtown, Marine Villa, is very, very different. And there's very little overlap actually.
Hmm.
Just basically the house I live in and a few a few of the blocks around there that translate into what I currently represent, which is the 8th ward. Um, the 20th ward had and still has some significant challenges. We had about 40% vacancy, a large amount of poverty, about
When
39%.
you talk about vacancy, you mean storefronts or homes or properties, or what do you mean when you say vacancy?
Both.
Okay.
We had a lot of vacant houses, several hundred LRA properties just in that little set of neighborhoods, and um, a lot of vacant lots. And so, what I did really tried to remove the barriers to investment. The liquor moratorium was one, but there
Absentee landlords paying fines and things like that, I think you got involved in.
I did get
Yeah.
very, very much
Yeah.
involved in that. But I also just, you know, the bureaucratic barriers. So there was a longstanding practice of having to go through the alderperson to get permission to buy a city-owned LRA property.
Yep.
And I made a blanket statement to the broader community and to the city officials who were in charge of that department that I didn't want to have anything to do with it.
Mhm.
If anybody came and was willing to make an investment and pass their test of having the wherewithal
I
and
see.
not having having the background check and all that sort of thing, then they could buy it. And I made those statements very broadly, very publicly, and the result was a lot of people coming to the table and buying those properties. In fact, over half of them were sold to the general public by the first into my first term. And it was funny. I went and got the sort of roster of all the folks who'd bought them, and I didn't know most of them, which was a huge success in my view, because these were citizens that had just made investments in the neighborhood because the door had opened up to them.
That's great. So a real boots on the ground, just jumping in and I think sometimes people they want like a really big vision, right? They want and big visions are great, but a lot of times it's just what is the problem immediately in front of you? Trash getting picked up or vacant lots. What can we do about that? And it seems that a lot of what you've done has been that very we're going to do this and that makes it better and we'll do that as opposed to painting this broad picture of how to fix everything.
It was a little bit of both. So it was exactly what you described, kind of identifying the issues. Okay, there's a problem with getting LRA properties. How do we remove that barrier? There's a problem for businesses to open up, restaurants, et cetera, need to make the margins on selling liquor. So let's do that. But visionarily speaking, changing the narrative about what Gravois Park is,
Sure.
changing the perception about Chippewa, making sure we got that road, which was very challenged, paved. We put in some traffic calming measures. We put in we redid all of the sidewalks instead of using the 50/50 program along those streets so that we could start to spur investment along an area in a concentrated, visionary, I would argue, sense,
Mhm.
so that you could start to see the organic growth happen around it. And now Gravois Park is one of the fastest growing neighborhoods. In fact, I think it was 2 years ago, my last year in the 20th ward, that the real estate values in that neighborhood were growing faster than any other neighborhood in the city, which was a tremendous, I think, marking of success for a neighborhood that had seen a lot of challenges.
And a lot of times people just feel like the sidewalks are new and the lights work and the roads are paved and those are stable table stakes. But if you don't you that's one way as an alderman or somebody in there, you have discretionary funds or you can use levers to help get dollars allocated for just what everybody just assumes is going to be there.
That's right. That's right. But on the back end too, I mean, I think being responsive. One of the things, as I'm thinking about my bid to serve as the city's next mayor, is addressing the underlying function of city government, the trash pickup and that sort
Mhm.
of thing. And as an alderman, you're really on the front lines of those complaints and those dysfunctions. And being an advocate, an everyday advocate for the community you represent, and hearing the complaints about the fact that the 3700 block of Iowa hasn't had their trash picked up for 3 weeks, and being the squeaky wheel that goes to the director of refuse and make sure that we're getting those things done, has a big return, a feeling of confidence, feeling residents just being heard, being listened to,
Mhm.
and having their day-to-day problems addressed, I think really builds confidence in a broader system.
I know we could talk about the different things that you'd been involved with as on your first or second term, but just one thing, you had opposed the privatization of the airport, which
Oh,
led to a recall vote, which is kind of interesting.
That's right. The
Maybe that's ancient history, I don't know, but you did have to do I mean, you have to take stands on things, sometimes the consequences are there, you know?
That's right. That wasn't the first recall petition that had
Mm,
been circulated. I think at my service, there have been at least three recalls that have been announced and circulated. The one related to the airport, I think, was the best funded effort to have me recalled. But I'm really proud when I ran for reelection of the 20th ward. I think I received 70% of the vote in a neighborhood where I am the distinct racial minority. Having people come out of the woodwork and just show gratitude for the work I had done, even small things like getting a dumpster replaced or things like that, make a big difference in people's lives. And it was very gratifying to have that result of that election.
so, wards when you first started, there were 28 wards in the city, and now there are 14. What do you in your, judgment, what's worked better and what's worked worse? Have there what's kind of on your take, the pros and cons of the ward reduction?
I do think reducing the board was an overall good thing. We now have a much expanded board of alderpersons. Everybody has staff, and there's a lot of additional resources there. What I think can and would work even better is if we were a smaller body focused more on the policies of the city. And instead of being bogged down with the day-to-day sort of dysfunction of city government, we could focus on just policies and being the eyes and ears on the ground to the community to help inform the broader city how to operate. Um, with the fractionated governance structure of the city and county, I think it's important that we start to consolidate a little bit. I think there are somewhere along the lines of 630 elected officials just in the city and the county, between all the aldermen of De Pere and
Sure.
the
Yeah,
bodies of
every
Clayton and everything.
municipality has their own board, their own alder people, as well as other committee people.
Yeah, that's right. I
Yeah.
mean, so it's a huge number of elected office holders. So I think if we can start to consolidate some of that, we can start to really consider how to better combine the city and county, combine our efforts, and have an organized and collaborative and collective approach to how the region moves forward. I have been really disappointed over the last 4 years that the conversation, the community conversation, and the conversation at the leadership level about a combination has fallen apart
Right.
completely. I think that's a huge mistake for us. Seeing the mayor talk about the fact that from her viewpoint, there's no benefit to combining city and county is really, I think, hurting the long-term possibility of doing just that. And I think the need is absolutely there.
So, in terms of not being as involved with the minutia and getting more towards policy, and I think there's actually now more committees than aldermen. And so, how does that how does that happen then? I mean, if the aldermen are not involved in that, how does that work get done?
Yeah, I don't agree with the approach that the current president of the board has to have so many committees. We obviously combined committees when we reduced the number of alderpersons, and I thought that was a good approach. But then now we have so many other committees: the committee of the red tape, the committee of the charter, the committee of the whole, the committee. I can't even keep track of all the committees. There are so many. I think it's important to remember in a government structure of checks and balances where everybody kind of falls. We're to be the legislative branch of city government, and the administration is really the administrative portion of city government. And I think the Board of Aldermen has been trying to sort of operate city government from the legislative branch. And that's really a failure of leadership, I think, in the mayor's office to really run with that and drive some of that conversation. But I think in the long run, we're sort of doing a disservice to the broader community. I mean, one of the things that we haven't really talked about is our budget and the constraints of it. And when we reduced the Board of Aldermen, what we really promised the community we would do is save money and streamline that process. Instead, the budget for the board has ballooned tremendously. I don't know that we've gotten more efficient in how we're operating. That's a question for the voters, I would say.
Yeah. In terms of having an impact in the city, there would be a couple of paths forward. One would be to run for the head of the board of aldermen when that president when that seat comes up. The other one is to run for the mayor, and you've made a decision now for a second time to run for mayor.
Mhm.
And so, why are you doing this? I mean, what's driving you towards what is it that you're that's pulling you in that direction?
Sure. Well, as we kind of talked about the structure of government, right? The Board of Aldermen is the legislative branch. And I think I've had some really big wins there, from the beginning, reopening the pool, raining down hard on payday lenders and other predatory businesses, including slumlords, and having some constructive wins on the airport last summer with the open carrying of firearms and paving the way for some development downtown through the use of eminent domain and other levers. And that's the legislative branch. But when I think about grading the city on how well we're performing, I look at One of the things is our population. Do we
Sure.
have are we are we attracting and retaining our citizen base? And we're by and large overwhelmingly not. Population loss in our city is nothing new. Of course, we've been losing population as long as I've been alive.
Since the 50s, I think. Yeah,
Yeah,
that was the we've lost 2/3, I think, or better.
that's right. But the speed at which we're losing population as a percentage of our base is new, John. In fact, when you look at national statistics, there are about 800 places in the United States that have a population large enough to call themselves a city. 800. And there are only 3 that are losing population faster than the city of St. Louis. It's really sobering. And remarkably so, that population loss is almost exclusively out of one geographical area, our north side. And we have an administration that has a stated set of goals of serving our north side, and it's clearly not working. You can see why people are choosing to leave. They're complaining about the basic city services, they're complaining about a lack of public safety, and they feel like their government doesn't hear them or respond. There's a loss of faith in the system. And these are not issues that you can address from the board alderman or from the presidency. These are issues of how a government functions. The basic city services fall squarely under the mayor. Public safety, again, with the exception of some policies that we put in place and the okaying of the budgets for the police department, fall squarely under the mayor. And a loss of faith in the system. This is being born out of corruption in many of our city departments, a failure when we closed the workhouse to adequately account for and plan for how to house people adequately in the CJC. And, the massive amount of funds that we receive from the federal government through COVID, we've been sitting on them. The lack of urgency and those funds that have gone out the door, the once in a lifetime opportunity we offered to North St. Louis through the North City Grant Program has failed abysmally. Abysmally. And so when I look at these reasons why people are choosing to leave, I see them falling squarely under the mayor's purview, under her responsibility. And I think it's time that we have a change in leadership, somebody who can roll up their sleeves and start getting the job done of serving our citizens.
In terms of your vision for that, and from does it get beyond the picking up trash and removing the ice and snow, and what are some vision items that, in terms of the loss of population, that you feel that you can start to address?
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, I kind of mentioned, kind of how I view this, the basic city services, the public safety, and the loss of trust and transparency in the system.
Kind of
So
those are the three big things then.
those are the 3 big things in my view. I mean, I kind of think about it in terms of what people could, what are making people leave. Obviously, we can look at what they're complaining about, potholes and trash and ice,
Yep.
right? We're all talking about a lack of feeling safe. And it's not just about the homicide rate. I am glad to see the homicide rate going down. I think there's a few things that are really responsible for this. Having a functional circuit attorney's office is a big key piece of that. I think that, the Office of Violence Prevention, the gun bill that we did last summer, a new police chief, these are all things that are helping in that. But at the end of the day, the sense of lawlessness in our communities, in our streets, it is ever present. You feel it just driving down the street. Cars that have an absolute reprehension for traffic laws.
Of course, yeah.
We're
So,
talking about red light cameras. I'm talking about cars that don't even have license
of
plates.
course,
I mean, so
right.
there's a feeling of that, and then again, that piece so that you don't feel confident. You've lost faith in the system. You feel like your government is what do the kids call it? Um, you know, um,
I'd be
um,
the last one to know what kids are calling anything these
well,
days.
no, but when you're feeling like your government is gaslighting you,
Yeah,
everything is fine. We're clearing the ice off the streets. We are, the crime is going down, and at the end of the day, our residents don't feel that way, and they're taking their families and going somewhere else.
right. So in terms then, one of the issues just has to do with number of police officers. There's a lot of complex issues, but if nothing else, we have a lot fewer police than we did even a few years ago. And part of that is pay disparity and things like that. You talked about the budget. There's limitations on things you can do on that front. Would you look and there's also then the issue of potentially state control of the police with a new governor. So in terms of proactive things that you can do to address the issues of crime, one is to hire more police. Another one is to look at some of the underlying issues of what's causing the crimes. And so how would you what sorts of things would you be able to propose to improve the situation?
I think, we talk about having more policing is an important piece. I mean, there still is a high level of violence, and when there's a gun and there's violence, we need to have armed police responding. So I think bringing those numbers up is important. I think that we have to pay them more. We have to incentivize them, and we have to have their backs sometimes. And sometimes having their backs, the backs of our police department, is not necessarily intuitive. Sometimes it looks like calling out policing when it is not in the best interest of our community. We saw that last year with the police officers running their vehicle into a bar. To throw our hands up as a city and say, well, it's just really tough to drive an SUV is really insulting to the overwhelming number of good police officers who work for our police department. So having, I think, their backs in a constructive and real way is important, and paying them a wage that can result in a higher number of folks wanting to be a police officer and willing to stick around in the city of St. Louis rather than going to a higher paid municipality in a surrounding community. So I think, hiring police, but I think we've got to be more creative in how we empower and work with them. So, for example, I'm talking a lot about reckless driving, and it is important. I mean, look, we had 20 people killed while walking by a vehicle last year. It's almost double the year before. And it's certainly tremendously higher than the national average.
And it does seem like it's worse. I mean, overall, post COVID, stoplights seem like they're optional in a lot of areas, and so
people are blowing through stoplights.
So if you go through and say, well, there's red light cameras, but does that really matter if the license plates are expired or there are no plates at all? And so it's an enforcement issue.
It is. And right now, of course, it's illegal to drive that way. Nobody's saying that we need to pass a new law on that. But the what's happening as the result, you get a ticket, you don't show up for court, there's no repercussions, isn't working. And so I've proposed that we take a more creative approach and say, look, if you're driving a vehicle as though it's a weapon, we are going to stop you from driving it at that moment. We're not just going to issue a ticket and send you on your way. We're going to impound the vehicle. This is a practice that went in place in Kansas City not very long ago, and it's been wildly effective at curbing the behavior. We're not going to steal your vehicle or take it forever, but we are going to take it for the night and put an end to the behavior that is really endangering the lives of the people inside your vehicle and everyone around it. And I think that those types of creative thinking are what's needed. Having vehicles parked throughout our streets, our communities without license plates at all. We've had a car parked up on Broadway right now for over a week that's clearly been stolen, stripped, et cetera. And, our tow lot's full. So the feeling that no one cares is ever present, and getting some of those basics right, while they may not seem visionary, they are, in my opinion, reestablishing a sense of order and an underlying framework for how a government communicates and has that sort of relationship with its public. We both need to do our part. The city needs to do its part in having that law and order piece, to have our citizenry that can plug in and feel confident in investing in that system.
It's one of those things you have to get right. And so if you go back to that example you gave at the beginning of Chippewa over by Gravois and getting something as simple as the sidewalks fixed and the street paved and the lighting and all that. And I think in a lot of ways, whether there can be the perception of safety versus which is probably in some ways it's changing that narrative you were talking
Hmm.
about, because I think that's one of the biggest issues we have downtown is we've got a real perception issue.
Yeah, I mean, but I think too, when you're visiting, going to a baseball game or a show downtown, and you see people that are driving like complete maniacs, you feel like
And nothing,
no,
if you can't get the small stuff right, how are
you
you going to
just
get the
feel
big?
like that it's lawless, that there are no laws. And so it makes you feel like you'll get jumped. It makes you feel like all these other acts of violence are very, very possible because no one is holding accountable folks that are endangering the lives of those around them. And so it isn't just a perception, it becomes reality. And so I think it's important that we do get those things right, because at the end of the day, um, th- we're losing lives. We lost the lives of 20 people. 20 people last year, John. That is not normal. It is not consistent
It's
with
just
any national standards.
pedestrians, right? Yeah.
That's right, killed by vehicles. Vehicles. And that doesn't even begin to count the number of people hurt. I think we're at a daily rate at this point. And that is not normal or acceptable for a city of our size.
And so given how big the city is, and at some point it can seem like the problems are insurmountable. Like, it's one thing if you can focus on a specific area. Do you have an area of focus that you would see as far as either geographically or policy wise when you would enter office?
Sure. Right off the bat, I think the baseline of city services needs to be addressed immediately, and that's I have some plans to get the potholes, get the trash, all those things kind of more streamlined right off the bat, and start reporting back to the community how we're doing, a report card, if you will, on those things. That's citywide. But I do think it's important that we are investing strategically in downtown in a way that can provoke and promote growth and economic activity in the downtown. And here's why. You know, um, Downtowns are the core of communities. And in the case of St. Louis, it is the core not only of the city, but of the broader St. Louis region. When you look at the economics of how a city works, the downtown subsidizes the rest of the city in a couple ways. In particular, in St. Louis, when we have the earnings tax, downtown is the mechanism through which we get people that live in the county to come to the city, work here, and pay into the system. It's a win for us. This is the primary place where we are able to extract, if you will, income, the earnings tax from the broader St. Louis region. So we need to make that model work because that earnings tax makes up a third of our general revenue fund. The other piece is that in addition to the earnings tax, our real estate tax from downtown is a tremendous part of our city's budget. And when we are losing businesses out of downtown, and we are, they're not just taking with them the earnings tax and the lunch patrons and the folks that are participating in the daily economics of our city, they're also depressing the real estate assessed value
Sure.
in our downtown. And that has massive, massive economic repercussions on the rest of the city. So without a flourishing downtown, the entirety of the city is picking up the tab for that loss. And so I do think we need to be focusing our efforts, our RAMS funds, and really how we're driving economic activity and prosperity into our city. We need to be focusing on downtown. And I'll also say, I am keenly focused on making the services function citywide. I think that's what's angering our folks at Holly Hills, on the Hill, et cetera. But we've also got to have a focus on down in our North St. Louis, because when I look at that population loss, it's coming almost exclusively out of North St. Louis. Now, scattershotting development in an area, a geographic area as large as North St. Louis, is not going to be effective. We have to do it strategically. But I do think that's an important piece of stemming the population loss, reestablishing an economic base of human beings, population that can be stabilized and be participating in the system, and positioning the city in a broader sense for growth.
So you brought up the Rams money, and that's been a little bit of I guess the sausage being made, if you will, of how things get decided. And there have been,
The drunk sausage.
yeah, right. And then so there've been a couple of board bills, and then it looks like we will not have resolution on that before the election coming up. And so that, I guess, is just part of that process.
Mhm.
And regardless if you're mayor or not, here in another 19 days, I guess, to the primary, and a couple weeks after that for the general election. How do you see the resolution of those dollars going?
Well, through the rest of the session, as of right now, we only have sine die left. We are past the point of being able to move either of those bills forward, save the president or the mayor calling some special sessions, which you can't predict the Board of Alderpersons, but I do not think it's especially likely at this point. Um, but I think that that may be somewhat of a blessing in disguise.
Mhm.
I was calling for urgency last year in moving some of the Rams forward, money, excuse me, forward. But I could not have predicted the mayhem coming out of the White House right now. And by that I mean, what is happening? Our federal government clawing back, making wild threats about removing funding from a large number of ways in which cities get funded. And we're talking about like our slate, the jobs department, health and human services, serving the unhoused, housing development through the community development agency, HUD, et cetera. All these, major funding sources may be cut. And if that's the case, John, we're going to be in a world of hurt and our budget
Sure.
is going to be turned upside down. So, we are going to have to, I think, very soberly take a look at what that looks like, even before considering all that. When we gave our city employees raises in this last round, which was done, in my opinion, in a haphazard manner by the administration, just a month before the pay study that should be driving what we're paying people is scheduled to be finished. Um, the budget director very, very plainly told the Board of Alderpersons, look, you guys are going to have to make cuts next year. You're going to have to make cuts. And this was the first time in my 10 years down there that he has indicated as such. We have that population loss I talked about. We lost a major lawsuit related to our earnings tax, and that has resulted in at least $42 million right out the door in returned earnings tax to residents in St. Louis County. That is going to continue in years to come, some portion of that. And so we have a budget, and I'm sorry, I failed to mention one important other factor, and that is the COVID dollars, which while we've been told hasn't been shoring up departments, it absolutely has. It absolutely has been shoring up city departments across the city. And so I think we're going to have to take a very, very hard look at what we can afford to do under the constraints of these new factors that are still largely unknown, and how what we figure out to do with with the Rams funds. It's gonna be some hard years ahead, John.
Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of population loss and ultimately, which whether that's through individuals on the residential side leaving or businesses leaving, but stakeholders leaving and still having to provide those services, that's a heavy lift even when things are going well. And the ability then to attract people in that decline, it's going to be a pretty difficult thing to try to lift.
Well, I agree with you. I think we've got some great things going for us. We are a fabulous place to live, truly. And I think that getting some of the baselines functioning better, addressing the quality of life issues, will mean that we will all have a better future. I mean, there's so many parts of our city that are stable in growth, and doing quite well. And at the end of the day, have the failures of city government are so easily addressable, with just some tweaks to the policies without investing any additional funds. For example, the roads. Potholes is something that people talk about and complain about on a daily basis. I mean, it is really one of the biggest gripes of folks. And, you know, we right now have a policy that allows the utility companies to pay the city to repave once they are doing their
Hmm.
investments underground. Nowhere else in the state is this the case. And, if we end that stupid policy and just say, Ameren, you guys repave it, they wouldn't have to put those giant steel plates. They would just repave the road. It would then save the city workers and be, kind of
Sure.
enable them to just focus on the maintenance part of things.
Sure.
And we would already be leaps and bounds ahead of where we are right now and being able to deliver flatter roads to our citizens. So there's some policy things right off the bat, John, that I think that we can put in place and make the city function better.
And so, I mean, that's it. It's easy to kind of talk about issues. All these cities have issues, and there's lessons I think that we can learn from, like Kansas City or Cincinnati with their over the Rhine neighborhood and
Mhm.
things that they have done. And so, as you look out, if we were to do this, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and what are those areas of improvement that you think we can work on? Since we can't fix everything,
Mhm.
what are some of the things that we can, beyond just maybe the potholes and getting the trash picked up?
Yeah,
Are
I
there
mean,
some bigger things that we can look to that would be those are certainly important to do, but are there other bigger things that we can be focused on and looking at?
absolutely. I mean, obviously, getting those complaints, those basic things, is something we need to focus on, and we will right away. But I think that focusing on our downtown and making our downtown flourish, rebuilding that tax base, so that we are all going downtown on a regular basis to enjoy the beautiful national monument and the city we have. And I do think that having a strategic approach to investing in North St. Louis is something we absolutely can put in place and start to see work. The work that you guys are doing down here in the near north downtown business district, connecting NGA, I think is critical. I'd like to see, instead of the city of St. Louis just fighting Jefferson City on everything, working with our governor to say, look, these are important investments. These are, how do we, our governor is in the same political party as our president. And right now, the federal government is offering furloughs to every employee of NGA. What does that mean for St. Louis? That is a scary proposition for that massive investment in North St. Louis, in my opinion, from my vantage point. So, how do we leverage our relationship with our new governor, who, by the way, is just downtown this week, announcing a presence in the old post office building, which is a great thing for our city, right? How do we leverage that investment on the part of the state of Missouri to shore up and further the investments that you all are making and that are connected to the NGA, a federal facility here in our city? And these are the things I think we can and should be working on.
Any closing remarks?
I have been throughout this campaign and my service talking about a lot of the issues and the shortfalls of city government. But there is a tremendous amount of hope, in my opinion, for the future. We have some very dysfunctional civic functions in city government, and I think fixing those creates an enormous path for growth. We have just a set of assets that is off the charts as far as being awesome. And if we can, and I know we can, get the baseline, the basics right, I think the sky's truly the limit. I mean, when you mentioned some of these other cities, Kansas City, Cincinnati, they don't even compare with regards to their asset portfolio to what we have here in St. Louis. And so getting the basics right, I think is infinitely feasible, and certainly makes the sky the limit.
Great. Well, thanks for your time this morning.
Of course, John. Thanks for having me.
Okay.